Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people who I've connected with over the years in the world of arts and entertainment. And today I'm very happy to have back on the show once again author and record store manager and music and band expert, Robert Lawson. Welcome back, Robert.
Hey Tommy, good to see you again.
Likewise. So, full disclosure, we did this one. My computer lost it. So here we are again, and this time it's going to be a keeper. So, Robert, this is your first time on Pop Trivia, and I chose you to do this because you are an expert, and people can see your collection behind you. Aside from all the books you've written, you've been listening to music and lots of music forever and selling it. So let's get started with a band that I know you wrote a book about, Cheap Trick.
Mm.
What kind of interesting story might you have about Cheap Trick that the public might not be aware of?
Well, one of the things that kind of struck me when I was researching my book, this is it here, Still Competition, is that on their second album, In Color, which came out in 1977, in the fall of 1977, there's a song called Southern Girls, and it's just a great poppy kind of hooky song, fun stuff. So in some interviews, Rick Nielsen used to say that the song Southern Girls is not actually about Southern girls in the United States, like in Texas or Florida or anywhere like that. He said it was actually about Southern Ontario Canadian girls, which was really cool for me being like a kid in the 70s, hearing that this song by one of my new favorite bands had a Canadian connection was really cool for me. And he jokes just that singing Southern Ontario Canadian girls doesn't kind of fit the rhyme or the meter. So I thought that was really cool when I was a kid. It was only when I was researching my book that I realized, or I kind of put it together, that hold on a second, the song Southern Girls was actually on their original demo tape that they recorded in Memphis in 1975. So then I started going through their lists of tour dates and all their touring schedule, and I realized they had never played Canada at the time that he would have written that song. And I actually asked, original drummer Bunny Carlos, who's like the Cheap Trick archivist, and he knows everything about Cheap Trick. Um, and he just said, yeah, that's totally untrue. That's just one of Rick's, kind of jokes. Um, and that was a bit of a letdown to when I realized that the Canadian connection there was just a complete lie, really. I mean, Rick Nielsen does that a lot. He likes to tell stories. I think he thinks it's funny, I guess. I don't. I'm interested in the truth, and I like facts, and I like reality, and it's hard to get a straight answer out of a guy like Rick Nielsen, but I guess it entertains him, so good
Yeah,
for
and
him.
it also entertains the ladies who think that he's talking about them. It's interesting you mentioned that he likes to tell stories. There's somebody else that we know about in a classic Canadian band. Randy Bachman is famous for not always seeming to be on the mark with his stories.
Yeah, but I think the difference there is like Rick knows that he's stretching the truth, and like I said, he thinks it's funny. I don't know if Randy really has much of a sense of humor about about anything, really. But I don't know what Randy's reasons are for stretching the truth. Sometimes I think he's just trying to cover up for a memory lapse. When I interviewed Burton Cummings for my Guess Who book, there were a couple things he didn't remember, and he would just say it. He would just say, "I don't know. That was, that was 50 years ago. I don't remember." But in general, his memory is very, very good. Whereas Randy likes to brag because he never drank and he didn't do drugs, that he's got this great memory. His memory is awful. It's terrible. But I don't know what the reason of why he tells these stories. When I interviewed the original drummer Gary Peterson for my book, and he was telling me about, I think they were on Much Music or something when there was a big Guess Who reunion in like 2001, 2002, and I think he said they were on Much Music being interviewed, And Gary told me that like Randy would be talking and Gary would just be like, why are you saying like to himself, thinking he wouldn't say anything on the air, but why are you saying that? That's 100% not true. You know, you why are you telling these stories? So people who know the band and who really know Randy and stuff, I think they know to take a lot of his stories with a grain of salt. You know, I have a live DVD back here where he talks about the third Brave Belt album coming out and it bombed and it didn't really sell because nobody liked the name Brave Belt. So then they re-released it as the first Bachman Turner Overdrive album. That's 100% not true. There's no third. The album was recorded as Brave Belt, and they changed the band name before it came out. But the whole preamble about uh, it being released as the third Brave Belt album and not doing well, that's 100% fiction. That never happened. So,
It's interesting, how things go. I was just thinking, I've been a lifelong musician myself, and I've toured all over Canada and parts of the States years ago and all that. And every now and then I'll talk to somebody from long ago and they'll say, do you remember that time that you played at such and such and this happened? Oh, that was so funny. And I'm just like, I have no idea who you are or what you're talking about. And one time somebody actually said to me, you know, my favorite guitar that you played was that double neck white Les Paul. And I'm thinking, I don't think I've ever seen a double neck white Les Paul, let alone me having one. So
oh,
people get a little confused, but life goes on. You also wrote a book about Nazareth.
yeah. Uh, to your last point, I think it's important to point out, and I say this often, that I don't begrudge any musician, especially anyone in their like 70s, like a lot of the guys that I write about, for not remembering the minutia of their career. I do not, I don't expect them. You know, they're not the train spotters in their own story. So I totally understand that they're not going to know. That's what, music nerds like me are for, to keep track of, what year a record came out and what was the B side of a certain single. I totally don't expect guys to know that. But I do kind of wish that they would maybe employ or get some fact checkers to help them with stuff like that. I was reading Springsteen's autobiography, which is a great book, but there's some mistakes that just jumped right out at me. I'm thinking this guy's got to have enough money that he could have got one of the biggest Springsteen fans around, who, not me, to just kind of check a couple of things. So that's my only thing about kind of these rock stars and their memories. I totally don't expect them to, their job is to create the art, to perform it, to tour it, not necessarily, to have a filing cabinet like me here of all these, newspaper articles and stuff like that. But they could use, these super fans to kind of help out with stuff like that.
Maybe that's an idea. Some of these guys should reach out more. And I'm not in my 70s yet, but like I said earlier, I don't remember a lot of stuff that happened in the 70s and the 80s when I was on the road. And it's just natural, I think. I've heard some experts say that what happens is that our memory banks get full. We've experienced so many things, and our brains can only hold so much information. So, anyway, that said, we were going to talk about Nazareth as well.
Yeah, so Nazareth, we're talking about Cheap Trick not having a Canadian connection, unfortunately. But Nazareth have a real strong Canadian connection. In the 70s, not only was Canada their biggest market, uh, but they recorded a bunch of their albums here at a Le Studio in Morin Heights, Quebec. So if you've heard any of the songs off records like uh, Close Enough for Rock and Roll, Playing the Game, Expect No Mercy, those are all recorded in Canada, which is great. Their famous kind of double live album, Snaz, from 1981, was recorded in Vancouver at the PNE. I know the Expect No Mercy tour was a cross Canada campaign that started in the Maritimes and went all the way to Victoria, BC. Uh, I've had occasionally people in my store tell me that they think Nazareth is a Canadian band. Like that's how connected they were. There's pictures in the 70s of bassist Pete Agnew wearing a Montreal Canadiens jersey. And I think more than that, because of the Canadian content ruling, which for people who don't know means a certain amount of Canadian content has to be played on the radio to kind of protect Canadian culture. So when Nazareth recorded a cover of Joni Mitchell's "This Flight Tonight," not only is it a great song and they do a terrific version of it, but it qualified for Canadian content regulations. So that song got played a lot on Canadian radio. When I was growing up in Winnipeg in the 70s, I heard Nazareth on the radio just as much as I heard, the Guess Who and Bachman Turner Overdrive and all the Canadian artists that I was listening to. So a real strong Canadian connection with Nazareth, which I guess makes it fitting that the first guy to ever write a book about Nazareth would be a Canadian.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like Scottish musicians have an affinity with us in Canada. And you're right, they got enough airplay that I decided to hitchhike from North Bay, Ontario to Sudbury, which was about an hour and a half drive back in those days. I don't know the bypasses and whatever these days, but it was about an hour and a half drive. So I hitchhiked with a friend to go see Nazareth, and it was their close enough for rock and roll tour. And there were a couple of things that I thought were just awesome. I remember Manny Carlton um, did the talk box thing, but he didn't use the standard golden throat talk box that Peter Frampton made famous. It was something with him and Dan McCafferty. Dan was using something that looked like bagpipes in unison with Manny doing something else on the floor, and that hair of the dog, that bow 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 bow. They did that together, so that was impressive for me. And the other thing, Manny Carlton, I think, was a very um, underrated guitar player. The man had talent coming out of every pore. And interesting to me, when he did his solo spot at that concert, it was bum ba bum ba bum bum ba bum ba bum 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 ba bum bum ba 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 ba. So the theme for Hockey Night in Canada. And it wasn't all flash, it was just beautiful magic on stage with those guys. And then I got stranded on the side of the highway overnight trying to get back to North Bay in a bus shelter. My friends abandoned me because I guess I passed out and they couldn't wake me up. The good old 70s. Yeah. Yeah. And I have an interesting story about Nazareth as well. It was a few years ago that I think they were on their last Canadian tour with Dan McCafferty on vocals. And I was at a friend's guitar shop when Brian Vollmer from Helix comes running in with a list, and he's on his cell phone talking to somebody else. He's trying to round up gear for Nazareth because somehow most of their gear got misplaced by Air Canada. And so he hands a list to my friend Reiner Wiekman, who was a guitar luthier and repair guy and has a lot of gear. And so I finished my conversation with Reiner, and I head next door to John Ballone's musical instrument store to buy some guitar cables. And they said, okay, well, the total is like 29.33 or something ridiculous, or a few pennies. And so, well, I don't know if I have the exact change. And all of a sudden, I hear this gruff Scottish brogue, pennies! I hate those effing things. Here, I'll give you the pennies. So to this day, I tell people that Nazareth and their crew helped me to buy some of my gear.
Right, right.
Oh, man. And Zal Clemenson. Do you remember the sensational Alex Harvey band?
Of course.
Yeah, and Zal uh, spent some time playing guitar with Nazareth as well, and I'm sure you know a lot about that.
Yeah, they brought Zal. Zal had played on Dan's first solo album that Manny Charlton produced, and the sensational Alex Harvey band and Nazareth had the same management, so they all knew each other. But when Zal came into the band, to me, that's the real peak period of Nazareth, because as great as the double live Snaz album that I mentioned is, when Zal was in the band, they recorded a live BBC or they recorded a live concert for BBC Radio at the Hammersmith, and it's about an hour long, the broadcast version of it. To me, if that had come out as an official live album back then, would have been like 1979 or 80, I guess. Uh, that would be one of the all-time greatest hard rock live albums ever. It's incredible. Like Zal and Manny together are just blazing through every track, and you can feel the excitement. Like they're dual soloing, on all these. It's not like one guy's playing lead and one guy's playing rhythm. They're both soloing like incessantly crazy throughout the whole thing. And I think Zal really gave them a great shot in the arm. He didn't last in the band too long because after that, it- crazily enough, they kind of veered into like a soft rock direction, which I think was a real crucial mistake. And Zal left. But for that brief period where he was in, and it used to be up on YouTube. You could listen to the whole audio of the Hammersmith show. I recommend anybody who's slightly interested in Nazareth or Zal Clemenson, you've got to check out this Hammersmith show. It's absolutely incredible. They did release it finally officially on vinyl in this giant Nazareth box set that came out a few years ago. But it was a huge thing. I don't know, it cost like $500 or something. I hope it gets its own individual release at some point. Some of the tracks have been used as bonus cuts on CDs, and there was even a four-song EP at one point. But if you can listen to the whole hour-long broadcast version of that BBC recording, just phenomenal, phenomenal. And Zal he really kicked it up a notch for the band.
No doubt. Now, you just reminded me. I wonder if they went to a softer vein of like soft rock, whatever. Um, I wonder if maybe Dan McCafferty was going through some sort of a midlife crisis at that time because I just remembered that he put out a solo record that had old classics like 50s stuff. Um, um, I think he covered things like Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Twilight Time, something around of that nature.
He did Out of Time, Stone song. Um he did a Dylan song. That's the solo album I'm referring to that Manny Charlton produced and Zal Clemenson played on. Yeah, he did do some standards, but that's a few years before they went off in this other direction. I
Okay.
think the misstep was that they got Skunk Baxter to produce them,
Oh, okay.
and they also recorded in the Caribbean, so maybe they were just too laid back and too they were in vacation mode too much or something. And the two albums that they did with him, they're not bad. There's some good stuff on them, but then getting out of that in the early '80s, heavy metal and hard rock kind of made a comeback in a bit of a different way. You had kind of hair metal and this poppy kind of metal, and Nazareth were like many kind of '70s hard rock bands. They had a hard time adjusting to that.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot going on back then, and music was going off in a lot of different directions. That said, we touched on the Guess Who earlier. One thing that I've found from my own interactions with people, I think a lot of people assume that Randy Bachman not only was one of the original founding members of the band, but that all of their hits featured Randy Bachman. And you know that that's not true.
Yeah, that's a really odd phenomena. I see it on social media a lot. I see it in my record store a lot when people are talking about the Guess Who. Even when there's a bit of controversy about who's in the Guess Who and who owns the rights to the name, and we've talked about that in the past. Um, some people will be like really adamant, like if it's not Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman, then it's not the Guess Who. And that's just like a really weird way of looking at it because Randy was fired from the band in 1970 while they were touring the American Woman album. So they did a whole bunch of records without Randy. Um, so to say like Randy has to be a part of any legitimate Guess Who, well, do you like the song Share the Land? Do you like Star Baby? Do you like Clap for the Wolfman? Do you like Sour Sweet? Do you like Rain Dance? Like the list goes on and on of all these great records and great songs that got a lot of radio play after Randy left. So not only is it odd that people don't know that Randy wasn't on those Guess Who records, but how was he putting out Bachman Turner Overdrive records at the same time if he was also in the Guess Who? Like that just doesn't make any sense of how, that BTO was big in the 70s. So how is he also in the Guess Who? It's just like a very odd thing that people don't understand. And I think that when Kurt Winter and Greg Lescue replaced Randy, I think like they didn't miss a step. I love Kurt Winter's contributions to the Guess Who, and he wasn't just a guitar player. He brought a lot of material. He was a songwriter, so he immediately became Burton's co-writer for a bunch of albums that he was involved in. So, yeah,
Yeah,
the Randy thing is kind of overstated in a lot of people's minds because, man, the number 10 album, like the Green album, some people refer to, that's like one of my favorite Guess Who albums of all time, and Randy's not on it.
it's interesting to me that when Kurt Winter was in the band, it still sounded like the classic Guess Who. And, the fact that he was co-writing or writing a lot of those songs, it's like it was a perfect fit. There was one other guitar player I love Dominic Troiano, but what are your thoughts as of him and his time with the band?
Well, that's an issue for some people because the two albums that they made with Dominic Troiano, uh, some people do, that's a little tough for some people. They definitely went into more of a fusion direction. Dominic was kind of a fusion player. He really left his imprint on the band. So those records are a little different. I like them a lot. I think the songwriting's still really strong. Of course, Burton's voice is incredible as always. But they're a little different. They get a little, some people think it's like kind of the Steely Dan version of the Guess Who or something, where Dominic's studio chops were like really high. A really real successful kind of technical player. But there's some great live recordings there's one from Electric Ladyland Studios, like a live to radio thing. There's a few things where you can hear the Guess Who live with Dominic Troiano, and it is a bit of a different band for sure. There's a lot of jamming, there's a lot of extended soloing, but I like that period a lot. It's a little different. I'll give you that. Um,
I
and I
feel
put
like, sorry, go ahead.
well, I wouldn't put those records up there with like Share the Land and So Long Bannatyne and Number 10, but I think they're still legitimate Guess Who records.
Yeah, I find that that period wasn't so much music for the average layperson as it was, whether it was intentional or not, more for musicians and for music nerds. Because now I love Dominic Triano, and especially now I can hear Burning at the Stake in my head, you know. I think we both know his brother Frank and Mark Doble, and they wrote the book about Dominic, but it wasn't the same thing as the classic Guess Who sound, that's for sure. Again, may it rest in peace, Dominic Trano, total respect and all that. Now, you've written another book recently, and we talked a little bit about it. And it's the Stephen Van Zandt Solidarity Forever. Have you got
I,
a copy of that right handy? There we go. Yeah, yeah. So, what's an interesting factoid that you can give us about Stevie?
I guess kind of similar to people not understanding Randy not being in the Guess Who for the entire career. It seems like a lot of E Street Band fans don't really understand how Steven's connection in there uh, worked. So in 1984, Steven officially left Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. He was devoting 100% of his energy to his solo career at that point. Um, and if you read Springsteen's autobiography and you read Steven's own autobiography, um, they kind of talk about, they had a big fight and it's like they broke up and they're pissed off at each other and they didn't talk. And it seems like there's just this huge division. And that's not really true. During the entire 1984-85 world tour for Born USA, Steven joined the band 10 times for the encores. So he was around quite often. In 1985, he rejoined the band so he could appear in the music video for the song Glory Days, which he's mugging and he's making all these faces and he's like a real big part of that video. Also, 1985, Bruce joined Steven on a project that Steven was working on called Sun City, which was an anti-apartheid benefit record. So I think there's a bit of a misconception that the two guys, like I say, they broke up and they had like nothing to do with each other for 10 years or something. And actually they were still together quite often. I think on the 85 Born USA tour, Bruce would like dedicate like one song to Steven like every night, or most nights anyway. So it wasn't quite the division that people think. If you have a chance, you can hear on the first time that Steven rejoined the E Street Band was they're doing some testing in my apartment. If you're hearing that alarm going off, there's been no heat for 24 hours, so Hopefully they're getting it sorted, but that's what that sound is. Um, on August 20th, 1984, Steven rejoined the band for the first time. He brought his horn section, which was the guys from Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, and they also played in his band, the Disciples of Soul. And Bruce and Steven do this incredibly moving duet of the old soul song, Drift Away. And even though that song is kind of a tribute to music, the way that these two guys sing it to each other, it's like a love song between two lifelong best friends. And I think that that song and that performance, specifically August 20th, 1984, really shows that the bond between these two guys was never broken.
That's cool. I was listening to a podcast the other day where they mentioned that Bruce broke up the E Street Band to do a solo career. And I wonder how much of that solo career was backed by the guys in the band. I'd have to go back and look. Maybe you know if Max Weinberg was on drums or anything like that. But um, that said, Stevie Van Zandt, um, he isn't just a musician. He's had some fairly significant roles in movies and TV series. There's the Christmas Chronicles, where he plays an inmate, and with Kurt Russell, it was a really cool movie, and they played some really cool music in that. And what was the one? Was it Norway? Where did they film the What was that TV series?
Well, he had after The Sopranos, which he was one of the stars in,
Right. Yeah.
and one of the greatest TV shows of all time, according to Rolling Stone magazine. He had his own show called Lilyhammer,
Right.
where he's a gangster kind of in the witness protection program. So he flees New York City and he goes into hiding in Lilyhammer, Norway, and like right away he just starts like being a mob guy and stuff. So it's kind of similar to Sopranos in that it is an Italian mafia kind of thing, but there's a lot more humor in it than Sopranos. It's
Yeah.
not, there's it's a real fun show. And Steven has a lot of his own music in the background of Lilyhammer. So I think Lilyhammer is a very cool, really fun project that he did. It lasted for 3 seasons on Netflix, and I keep hoping it might come back one day.
Well, here's to hoping. Well, listen, I think we got it right this time. And I don't want to take up your whole day, Robert, but I do want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this with me. And until next time, cheers. Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. And hey, here's some news. We've just recently joined forces with 519 Magazine, so you can check out my interviews there as well. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn, all rights reserved. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us keep it going, why don't you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, cheers.